So hi everyone, my name is TK Sakwa and I'm a senior at Columbia University. And today I will be speaking on hair products in the context of colorism, the implications of darker skin. And as I was creating the presentation and planning what the session would look like, my ideas really evolved to more so center storytelling and the power of testimony, because I'm also the creator of the Instagram digital healing space called The Darkest Two, which centers Black women and girls who are dark-skinned and femme-identifying people who are affected by colorism and misogyny. So the theme of today is the power of testimony. So I just want to go over the overarching goals and why I felt compelled to create the session in the way I have today. So my goal for the session is to add nuance to our conversations about anti-Black racism. I noticed that a lot of our conversations about anti-Black racism really tend to center cishet Black male and don't really explore the intersections of misogynoir and queerphobia, homophobia, transphobia, etc., colorism, futurism, texturism as it affects Black people. So I noticed that mainstream conversations about anti-Black racism are not as specific as they can be. And because these conversations are not super specific, it's not really helpful in giving Black people who are affected by other racialized like stigmas, the help they need and the support they need. Another goal is to support Black women and girls in very, very specific ways. So growing up and experiencing colorism, texturism, futurism in both of my different communities. So I was born in Freetown, Sierra Leone, and I experienced all of the isms there, which was really interesting. And when I moved to the United States, I also experienced colorism, but it's really interesting being a part of these two very different cultures in a way, and still seeing the parallels between how dark-skinned Black people are treated in these different cultures, and how dark-skinned Black people are treated in West Africa versus how dark-skinned Black people are treated here in the United States. So why are we going to add more nuance to these conversations around anti-Blackness? It's so that we can be able to have very specific conversations about how anti-Black racism affects Black people with other racialized identities. And what I mean by racialized identities, I mean physical features that are heavily stigmatized and scrutinized in society. So having coarse hair, having broader features, a bigger nose, a bigger lips, things that have been historically racialized to be associated with Blackness and have been discriminated against and have been demonized and vilified in the historical construction of race. Another reason these conversations are important to have and to frame in this way is so that we can stop generalizing the experiences of Black people and meet specific and personal needs. So something I noticed often when I was growing up in middle school, especially, the way bullying was framed, it was very generalized. It was more so kids will be kids are mean, kids are going to bully, but I experienced very specific racialized bullying from other Black children while I was in middle school. And I don't think my white teachers or even some of my Black teachers really had the language or like the skills to like facilitate those conversations between me and my other Black classmates about why they shouldn't say colorist things, like why they shouldn't say jokes that are like xenophobic to like West African people and their West African peers and classmates. So I really want for us and everyone within their respective like careers and professions, or even in their interpersonal circles, to really stop generalizing the racialized experiences of Black people, because depending on how you look as a Black person, they're going to be very different. So how are we going to do this? Excuse me while I move this, okay. We're gonna do this by introducing colorism, futurism, and texturism into our lexicon. And I will go over more about what those specific terms mean. Okay, so first we're gonna start on colorism. I think this is the most, out of these three terms, it's more like popular and more people know about it. So colorism is prejudice or discrimination against individuals with a dark skin tone, typically among people of the same ethnic or racial group. So colorism does operate on a spectrum. So someone who is light skinned and someone who's like brown skinned, that brown skinned person might experience colorism relative to that light skinned person, but a dark skinned person is always going to experience colorism in some way. I also want to emphasize that colorism is gendered. The way them identifying women, girls experience colorism is very different from the way it manifests for cishet Black men. We see colorism in the more like systemic depiction of Black men and them being depicted as like aggressive, or like the fetishization of Black men and certain like spirits of beauty, which also is harmful. But with Black women, girls, femme identifying Black people, we see colorism as being denied access to certain like beauty spaces and being economically disadvantaged and being really targeted by advertisement companies to buy these harmful products that we were discussing when this conference started. So featureism. Featureism is prejudice or discrimination against individuals with facial features typically associated with African descended people, such as broad noses, big lips, coarse hair, and dark skin. Again, I think it's really important to think about featureism because even within dark-skinned people, certain dark-skinned people get more representation than others. So when you think about high-end dark-skinned models, they all typically have a certain like very specific look. And I noticed that some parts of Africa are targeted more than others for recruiting Black models. So there's not a lot of traffic in West Africa to recruit Black models, but there's a lot of traffic in North Africa and East Africa and regions in Africa where Black people have more slender facial features. And I think that's not a coincidence. I think it's very deliberate. And then texturism. Texturism is prejudice or discrimination against individuals with coarse, kinky, and short natural hair, usually associated with African descended people. And I think people already sort of know about texturism too, but they just have never really connected a word to it. It's also called, I think it also is associated with like hair discrimination. If you were in the Crown Act section, the speakers gave examples of instances where Black children were discriminated against, sent home, or humiliated publicly for the hair that naturally grows out of their head. So in the next 3 slides, I'm just going to show the next 3 slides are going to be like collages from the content I make over on my Instagram platform, and I'm just going to map how colorism, featureism, texturism manifests in society, and how the next time you see a viral news story about an instance of anti-Blackness, you can use these 3 concepts to think about it in a more specific, nuanced way. So first, I'm going to be talking about colorism. So colorism manifests in society in numerous ways. So you have, and just follow my little laser thing so you can follow. So obviously it manifests systemically. So Dr. Elis Monk, who's a sociologist at Harvard, conducted the study in which he showed that the chance of arrest for African Americans actually increased the darker complected the person got, which I think is a very important distinction to make. I think usually when we talk about police brutality and the prison industrial, we don't talk about colorism and what kinds of Black people do get persecuted disproportionately, even within the race of Black people. They're very, very generalized conversation. And I think adding colorism to these conversations can be very useful. And of course, colorism also manifests on what we see on television. So if you follow me here, this is actor Zoe Saldana. This is singer icon Nina Simone. And there was a huge uproar because Zoe Saldana physically light-skinned. She's biracial. At some point, she wasn't even claiming that she just said she was Latina and didn't really acknowledge her Black side. She was asked to play Nina Simone, and she accepted the role, and she even had to darken her skin with like paint and put on a prosthetic nose instead of just allowing the role to be occupied by someone who phenotypically is more similar to Nina Simone. And another example of that is recently with actress Zazie Beetz playing Stagecoach Mary. And again, Nina Simone, Stagecoach Mary, these are historical like figures that existed. They were real people. We know what they actually look like. They're not mythical beings. So it's really interesting to see how their image and their likeliness is essentially just revised in front of us, and it's okay. And I think there's enough blame to go around, so because obviously Hollywood has a colorism problem, but I think these actors and actresses also need to take individual onus and responsibility and accountability for not occupying these spaces, which should be given and allocated to dark-skinned Black women who have historically already been denied spaces to be on television and for their stories to be heard and told fully. Other examples, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the film Straight Outta Compton, but there was a casting call released, and it was ranking the types of women they wanted in the movie. So there was A girls, B girls, C girls, D girls, and A girls were described as racially ambiguous, light-skinned girls, skinny girls, and then D girls were described as fat girls, overweight girls, dark-skinned girls, African-American girls versus like racially ambiguous girls. So that's another manifestation of colorism, what people think is beautiful and what people want to represent on television and in a good light per se. Another example of colorism manifesting in children's shows. So colorism obviously starts very, very young. I think a lot of people are surprised how much colorist bullying little kids endure by other children because they don't think children can be that cruel, but children are so impressionable. They're always absorbing messages from televisions. For example, the Proud Family, the dark-skinned woman and girl characters are portrayed as bullies, as like sassy. They're not multifaceted. They're portrayed in very stereotypical ways. And then I just wanted to talk about one more example from, sorry, this is really hard, okay. And then a Villanova study found that light-skinned Black men got shorter prison sentences than darker-skinned ones. In a New York Times article, Viola Davis was pictured here, was compared to Kerry Washington, and the critic called her less classically beautiful than Kerry Washington, and they are both Black women, but Viola Davis is obviously dark-skinned. She has more broader features than Kerry Washington. So it's important to note that their treatment in society within Black spheres, within white spheres, is going to be different. I follow the Twitter discourse around Ari Lennox and Tiana Taylor, and they're often called Rottweilers on Twitter because of their physical features, and they're darker skinned, and they have like broader, wider noses and bigger lips. And you would never see someone calling a Lori Harvey a Rottweiler or a Rihanna a Rottweiler or comparing Beyonce to a dog. Racist depictions of Serena Williams and Michelle Obama versus like Melania Trump. There are so many videos on YouTube literally trying to explore if Serena Williams and Venus Williams were born biologically men, which is another instance of futurism and colorism, and then those two things being associated with like hypermasculinity, and how that can be very dangerous for dark-skinned Black girls, femme-identifying folks who do have those features. I vividly remember when Megan Thee Stallion revealed that she was shot by Tory Lanez. People were posting very offensive memes. The rapper 50 Cent posted a meme of Megan with the body of a man like running away, implying that she got shot because Tory Lanez found out that she was actually a man. So all these like jokes also are also transphobic in a sense. Not that the victims of these jokes are trans women, but they do follow a similar kind of rhetoric, which I think is really interesting. And as for texturism, I saw texturism when the petition urging Beyonce and Jay-Z to comb Blue Ivy's hair versus how Northwest Kim Kardashian's child, pictured here, and this is Blue Ivy, how Northwest was praised for her natural hair, which is silkier and like more loosely defined and not as textured as Blue Ivy's. She was called a natural hair icon by magazines. Vogue posted an article how Northwest curly styles are inspiring a generation of natural hair girls, but they would never post something like that about Blue Ivy. There were just offensive memes about like people saying, this is what I expected Blue Ivy to look like. And people just very upset that Blue Ivy didn't come out being light-skinned with silky 3-type hair like her mom, Beyonce. So I thought that was really interesting, comparing those two little children who certainly don't deserve bullying and don't deserve public scrutiny, comparing how they are received by the public based on their physical features. I also, on my platform, I usually explore hair discrimination in work settings. And these are just like 3 examples of women whose hair textures who have been discriminated against because of their hair textures. So after surviving bone marrow cancer, Tiffany Bryan decided to start wearing her natural hair in 2008. In 2013, when she was hired by AEG Worldwide as a security guard, Bryan was fired for refusing to tame her afro. Again, Brittany Noble in 2018, she worked at a news broadcast center, and you can see her hair is not out. It's tightly like kept, and she was still discriminated against. The news director told her that her natural hair is unprofessional and the equivalent to him throwing on a baseball cap to go to the grocery store. So as you see in these 2 examples, it's not really about how the hair looks. It's just that you have the texture of hair that has historically been discriminated against and antagonized and vilified. And in 2018, Faith Kennedy, an 11-year-old girl at Christ the King Elementary School, was expelled because her braids were deemed inaccessible under their school code. So tying this to the overall arching theme of this conference about like toxic hair products, because of these societal pressures, marketing agencies know who to advertise to. They know to target specifically Black girls, Black women, Black femme-identifying people who have been made to feel insecure, have been made to feel like they need to buy these toxic hair products to approximate a palatable hair texture or a palatable skin complexion. And it's very exploitative because without colorism, the skin bleaching industry wouldn't be the billion-dollar industry that it is right now, that it would simply not exist in its capacity. So I think that's really interesting to keep in mind, like thinking about these societal pressures and thinking about how people exploit these pressures to just get money out of Black women, Black girls, and Black femme-identifying folk. So in the spirit of this talk and my platform, The Darkest Hue, I really center storytelling. There's a series it's called the Spotlight series, where I highlight and publish testimonies from real dark-skinned girls, women, femme-identifying folk who have experienced colorism, featureism, texturism, all of the isms, to come and share their stories. So I've brought 4 of them here with me, and 3 are gonna share right now, and then Naima is gonna share at the end. Okay, so first is Evie. Evie, can you unmute? And I'll mute mine.
I'm trying to put it, okay. I try to put it on video, but it's not working.
Can you see my screen?
Yeah. Okay, now I can see it. Okay.
You, Evie.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I would literally be sitting there having a casual conversation, and some boy had to say something about how much he disliked dark-skinned women or talk about my hair. I've been called gorilla, monkey, had my hair compared to pubic hair, and so many hurtful things. And some of those insults were from Black boys. Middle school really degraded me and affected my self-esteem. When I started my sophomore year and started to glow up, and people would constantly call me beautiful, I wouldn't believe them. I'm proud that my self-esteem is way better. I'm now more confident. A lot of people who insulted me have tried to get at me or aren't doing better than me. And I speak out about colorism because I want other Black girls to know they aren't alone. Because for a long time, I thought I was alone and thought it was normal to be treated that way. I didn't even know some of the insults like gorilla and monkey were racist. I don't ever want my kids or any child to go through what I went because I went from having a high self-esteem at a young age to feeling like I wasn't worth anything. Colorism is real and it needs to stop.
Thank you so much for sharing. So Evie very bravely and courageously sent this in to be published on the platform, and it resonated with so many people. And now we're going to go to Brianna's. So Brianna, just unmute when you get the chance.
Yeah, of course. Hi, good evening, afternoon, everyone. My name is Brianna Taylor, and I just want to thank TK and just the Darkest Hue platform for inviting me here and uplifting my story. When I was younger, I would dread the summertime. I was constantly fearful of how dark my skin would get because of the sun and how I would further be ostracized by my classmates. After 7 long years of being the only Black girl in elementary and middle school, I moved to a school where I became one of 11 Black students. While I'm surrounded by more Black people, my experiences among my lighter skinned female peers was vastly different. I was not seen as beautiful because of the coarseness of my hair and the darkness of my skin. My activism and outspokenness was fetishized and construed into the angry Black woman stereotype. I had to explain to my light-skinned sisters why I couldn't take hair care advice from them. I had to constantly defend the validity of my experiences as a dark-skinned Black woman. I had to be the representation I wished I had. I worked diligently in school, poured my heart into my activism, and created my own spaces for self-love. It's been a long and hard journey, but I can truly say I love my skin more and more each day. I'm a dark-skinned Black woman, and I would not change that for anything in the world.
Perfect. And now we have Sadia.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sadio. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm an alumni of the University of Maryland, and I'm so excited to speak about my experience. Okay. I rarely saw a woman with my complexion on screen. One of the first dark-skinned characters I came across was Pram from Martin, but she was berated constantly, talked down upon, and the butt of so many jokes on the show. It didn't help my view of myself. After a long day of playing outside, my neighbors would always say, "Dang, y'all got so burnt, looking so dark." I never saw my darkness as beauty, but only as a setback. I remember taking bleach baths in middle school. I would tell my mom it was for my eczema, but really I was hoping it'd make me lighter. When I was 14, I read The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. I related to Piccola so much. I so badly wanted my skin and my eyes to be light. I would stare at the sun, hoping my eyes would just turn hazel. I wanted badly to develop heterochromia so I could be exotic. I'm already exotic, I'm Nigerian. It's taken a lot of unlearning to understand that lighter doesn't mean better. I love myself fiercely. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing. So that's just a little snippet of what we do over at The Darkest Hue. People can share their stories and find community and other people who are experiencing these things. And what I've noticed with comparing the testimonies to my experiences is that we experience a lot of the same things. We also been conditioned to feel like we're the only people experiencing these things and having these encounters with colorism, futurism, and texturism. But I think the power of testimony lies within the fact that you can find other people who are experiencing these things that society will try to tell you are like taboo and niche and not worth like speaking out against. So that's why I invited these three girls to come and share their stories. But for the next portion of the session, Carolina is going to ask me a few questions, and she helped me plan my session and was really like my go-to person for organizing what the structure of my session will look like.
Thank you, TK. If you want to stop sharing your screen for a second.
Yeah.
So TK, thank you again for joining us. And again, thank you to all the women who just shared their stories. TK, when did you realize that there was a need for a space like Darkest Hue?
So last summer, there were so many things happening with, like, I felt like anti-Blackness was exploding all over the country. But I still did not see a space where dark-skinned people could come and gather and talk about colorism without being gaslit, without being called jealous, insecure, you need to heal, you're just envious of light-skinned girls. Like, I really couldn't pinpoint a safe space like that where I could just go and be honest about my experiences. So I thought, you know what, I'm just going to create that space because it's a space that I've been yearning and longing for since I was little, since I was in Sierra Leone with my grandma trying to like sneak me bleaching creams and like experiencing colorism in my predominantly Black middle school in Philly, and just experiencing colorism in so many different settings throughout my 21 years. So I just really wanted to have those conversations, and I know other people were hungry for those conversations too.
Thank you so much, TK. Absolutely. And it's a wonderful platform. I highly encourage everybody to visit. If we move on to the next question, why do you think talking about colorism makes so many people uncomfortable?
I think people don't want to implicate their own internalized biases and the harm that they have possibly inflicted onto other Black people. I think it's very easy for people to talk about the harm white people inflict. And of course, colorism and like anti-Blackness, white supremacy, they're all like cousins in a way. But with colorism, it's very unique because you can be oppressed and you can be an oppressor to some capacity if you are the one saying these colorist things, or if you do rise in the ranks as a Black person and you're only bringing light-skinned people with palatable features with you. So I think people are get very defensive. They don't want to like admit to being harmful. So I think that's why colorism is a very hard conversation to have.
And I'm really glad that we could have you on today to talk more about it. And we hope to continue this type of conversation to add nuance, as you said, to the conversation of anti-racism. We see that we have some questions coming on, and I hope we'll get to those, TK. You and I talked a lot about storytelling. Do you think it's an important tenet to the Darkest Hue? And what role do you think storytelling has in addressing the problems of colorism, texturism, and featurism?
I think storytelling is a very important tenet to the Darkest Hue because it helps, because I do a lot of research-based work, but I think with the storytelling element, it helps humanizes the studies and the empirical stuff, and it helps put a face to these problems. I use a lot of like pop culture references when I want to like generalize how colorism manifests in society, but I also think it's important to see how colorism like manifests in the lives of the everyday person who isn't particularly wealthy, who doesn't have all these like societal protections, like how to identify colorism and like your friend, your classmate, your peer, your loved one. I think that's really what the testimonies do. And for the people who are reading the testimonies who can relate, it's it's both hard to read, but it is comforting because you know that you can message the person and like show love to that person and connect with that person and say, I've experienced this too. I don't feel as alone as I once felt.
Definitely. I mean, I commend everyone who's on here and on the platform again for sharing their stories. And last of all here, TK, what do you think is missing from mainstream discussions about anti-Blackness?
I think mainstream discussions about anti-Blackness are really missing just nuance and specificity. I think because a lot of people don't understand that even within Black people, certain Black people have privileges over other Black people, that they tend to generalize experiences of Black people. And when I hear about people talking about like instances of like police brutality where like a Black person is murdered by the police, they never really want to talk about like ableism, for example, like the fact that Black people who are like ableist, who are disabled, are at a high-end risk because they don't present typically, and that raises alarm bells in police on top of being a Black person. And then imagine you're also dark-skinned on top of that. So these conversations are never really specific, and I think that's so harmful because they need the responses and the how we're going to tackle and like solve these problems, those solutions need to be very specific because problems are not as general and easy to understand as some people make it out to be.
And we hope, I think as you and I have discussed, that these conversations will also become more entrenched within research, as, you know, for example, with someone like Dr. Alice Monk, who you brought up in your slide, it becomes important to know that this conversation needs to be had about the funding that is available to Black researchers and just kind of nuancing that conversation a little bit more in that space. So absolutely. I think you wanted to now have one more story to share.
Yes, so I really wanted to bring Naima on to share her story because she has also struggled with colorism, and like me and other people, she was inspired to start her blog, Dear Dark Skin Girl, and because she didn't see that space and that community that she wanted, so she decided to take a leap of courage and faith and just start that blog. But I will let her do the talking. I'm just gonna share my screen one more time.
Okay. Well, hi, I can just introduce myself now. Thank you so much for having me here. My name is Naima. I'm currently a freshman at Penn, and I've been a longtime follower of Darkest Hue, and I'm really excited just to be speaking about my experience because colorism is something I feel very passionate about. So growing up in a predominantly white community, I didn't have many other Black people to look up to. It was always discouraging to only see Black women on TV shows or movies who were either lighter skinned or playing into a stereotype if they were darker. I feel lucky that my parents told me that my dark skin was beautiful from a young age because so many other young girls didn't have that. Nevertheless, I grew up insecure with my dark skin and spent a lot of time wishing I was lighter. It has only been in recent months that I've embraced my skin tone and sought out the stories of other women who have gone through the same thing. I started a blog, Dear Dark Skin Girl, to continue advocating for Black women and girls. It has been such a great outlet for me to connect with other Black girls. I know that whatever career path I go on to pursue, uplifting Black women, particularly those who are dark-skinned, will remain a key focus.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I really just wanted to highlight your story because I'm always trying to encourage people who contribute to the Darkest Hue to start their own platforms and create their own initiatives. And if they see a space that's lacking in society, to like make that own space. And I think even people who are not affected by colorism or futurism, texturism, can also do that kind of work. If you think something that affects you is like too taboo or niche to enter mainstream conversations, just go for it. Just try to create your own space, try to find that community And with so many things being online, there's so many different avenues and possibilities to create digital communities.
And so I think we want to now open up the floor. If anybody wants to speak up, comment on anything that's been discussed, any questions for TK or any of the ladies who shared their stories. I see that Mew raised their hand. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
I wanted to say thank you for the platform. It's been really insightful because it's like you said, we don't realize that a lot of other people feel the same way until a platform like yours has been created. And I had an initiative in 2018 called Spring Melanin. And it was basically a space for which centered dark-skinned women of color.